Welcome to Forthright. I'm Sulani Madsen and reading a recent column on electric vehicles. And let me put this into context the same way I started every interview for this column. I am not a knee-jerk opponent of EVs. I would love to be able to blithely drive home and simply plug in my car or truck to refuel, but I'm a pragmatist and it's not that simple. And after a Tesla fire last summer, I was contacted by a friend in the Fairfield area who wanted someone to look into the rest of the story of the Tesla fire in the willow tree. So with a salute to the inimitable Paul Harvey, here is that column. As published on November 2nd, 2023 in the Spokesman Review, with some commentary to follow. EV challenges no longer hypothetical in Fairfield. When a Tesla landed in their willow tree last June and burst into flame, Mark and Chris Mewini didn't expect to still be cleaning up 5 months later. "We're still finding pieces of melted glass and metal in our pasture," Chris said. They have cross-fenced the pasture to keep their horses out of the impacted area. Sean Thompson from Washington's Department of Ecology Hazardous Materials Response Unit was there the day after the deadly crash in Fairfield. He was appreciative of the Mewini's flexibility through the long process of testing and mitigation. It took 2.5 months for the initial environmental cleanup. 3 barrels of waste still sit by the road waiting for pickup. But it's not the bits and pieces of auto body that worry the Mewinis. It's the possibility of contamination to the springs under the willows and the intermittent creek they feed. Individual battery cells, the size and shape of shotgun shells, were launched from the crash site like bottle rockets, said Chris, who was only about 100 yards away at the time. "I saw a little plume of black smoke, and by the time I got there, it was flames 10 feet high. It was so fast," she said. Devin Billington, Assistant Fire Chief for Spokane Fire District 2, said a normal vehicle fire is usually out in 30 minutes, whether the fire department is there or not. Quote, "You can dump as much water as you want and they, EV fires, don't go out. So at that point, you're doing more harm to the environment with the runoff. But if you don't suppress the fire, the smoke is hurting the environment," Billington said. The toxic chemicals in the smoke cannot be removed from firefighter turnouts. Replacing personal protective equipment, PPE, at a cost of about $4,000 per person is a strain on tight fire department budgets. In an email, Spokane County Fire District 2 Chief Eric Olson said his personnel were able to conduct operations upwind of the crash site, and the district decided not to pursue replacement this time. Neighbors downwind are still wondering what their exposure was. How best to handle EV fires with the least harm is a matter of hot debate, not only within the fire service, but also at DOE. It needs to be discussed in the public square as well, without labeling people who want to face the challenges being dismissed as anti-EV Luddites. You can't fix problems you won't name. "We're in a technology blind spot," DOE's Thompson said. He noted the need to address concerns with smoke, water runoff, and cleanup. A quote, "This is not a standard fire. It has a new component to it, a new level of energy," end quote. It's about the batteries. A summit was held a year ago after an arsonist set a fire to Home Depot, and it was made difficult to extinguish by batteries in lawn equipment. DOE is also researching the impact of backup home energy storage systems, known as power walls, and their potential for turning residential area fires into hazmat incidents. The old fire service motto to just put the wet stuff on the red stuff doesn't work on lithium-fueled fires hot enough to burn metal and boil the sap in a willow tree. Spokane County Fire District 2 decided to let the Tesla burn itself out and confined its efforts to protecting the surrounding pasture with 800 gallons of water. Thompson said DOE tracked the runoff and sampled the soil where it was absorbed. It would have taken thousands of gallons more to attempt to extinguish the burning batteries to reduce air pollution. "I worry about all the small volunteer fire departments I work in. There's not enough tankers," Thompson said, answering his phone from a fire station in Pend Oreille County. "If they had a fire and mobilized every apparatus in this county, they still wouldn't have enough water," end quote. Developing the infrastructure to support a fully electric vehicle future means more than just adding charging stations and increasing electrical grid capacity by 20 to 50%. It requires naming all the problems in order to design solutions. Battery-driven vehicles are heavier, hammer the roads, and are harder on tires. On average, EV vehicles weigh 30% more than their modern counterparts, whose weight has ballooned over the past 3 decades. In 1993, a Mini Cooper weighed 1,400 pounds. The 2023 EV version weighs 3,144 pounds. In a collision, the heavier EVs lead to a, quote, increased risk of severe injury or death for all road users, end quote, according to the head of the National Transportation Safety Board. As road diets have reduced the traffic capacity of urban roads, an increasing number of heavier vehicles in the transportation mix may require putting bridges and parking garages on a diet as well. Engineers will need to evaluate the design capacity of existing physical infrastructure to determine the new carrying capacity. We're forcing adoption of a new technology faster than society can absorb it. So that was the column. And, much of the discussion about EVs has centered on the problems of expanding the power grid capacity to handle charging. I mean, I'm not even sure we have enough linemen to even do that. And the need for a better network of charging infrastructure to reduce range anxiety. And while the oft-cited statistic saying 80% of trips are less than 20 miles total sounds about right for the city, and that would work great for an EV, I live 20 miles from a grocery store. People living rural already have to deal with range anxiety. After the crackdown on underground storage tanks meant that many rural gas stations closed and home delivery of fuel became problematic. And it's not that keeping leaking underground storage tanks was a solution, but solving one problem led to another. Now driving around remote areas of eastern Washington requires paying attention to the fuel gauge and where that next possible stop is. Driving around in a wildland fire truck like those responding to the Gray and Oregon road fires this summer also means monitoring the fuel gauge. While the human crews are swapped out after 8 to 12-hour shifts, the trucks were kept going for 3 days. So did sheriff's cars and city police cars brought in to assist with public safety, with evacuation, suppressing looting, traffic control. Liquid fuels can be delivered to the field. Tanks can be filled with a short turnaround and the truck's back in service. EVs can't do that, and that's a problem. EVs are handy technology, but their batteries are their weak link. Without even getting into the environmental and human working condition impacts of mining lithium, lithium-ion batteries are a major environmental hazard. It's caused another kind of fire-related problem on Maui. With high electricity prices and lots of sunshine, Hawaii has a high proportion of homes with residential solar and the power walls of lithium-ion batteries to store energy overnight. It makes perfect sense there when they work. After a fire, especially a major fire that has burnt through a neighborhood, it leaves a series of hazardous material sites requiring very careful cleanup. It's been a complicating factor in Lahaina, and where cleanup has already been difficult because it's an island. You can't just truck the waste to the next state over. It all has to be shipped out. As these power wall installations become more common in this area, in eastern Washington, so will the hazards to firefighters, to the residents, and to the natural environment. Then there's the weight issue. The number most often cited is that EVs weigh 30% more than their companion internal combustion engine vehicle of the same class. It's due to the battery weight. And I dug into it thinking of a recent parking garage collapse in New York City, and that parking garage was built in 1923, so it was built for an entirely different set of weights. And I realized we need to think not just of a comparison of weight of today's individual models, but the weight creep of cars, even over the last few decades, as more SUVs are in the mix. Building codes can be changed to address new construction, but what about existing infrastructure of high-rise parking garages like the parkade and the added wear on already failing bridges? Heavier vehicles are also harder on roads. They shed bits of tire into the environment more often than lighter weight vehicles. Maybe EVs should pay a road tax based on axle weight like truckers do. I did get one reader feedback email from a reader who said they didn't sell Mini Coopers in the U.S. until 2002. They were a UK company in 1993, which is fine. There's a link to my source on the weights is included in the resources on Substack. Peter from Coeur d'Alene objected to comparing today's EV Mini Cooper to the 1993 British model, but I wanted to make the point that we may already have a problem with the weight of cars in general exceeding design loads. I need a structural engineer to volunteer to run some numbers. But the question remains. Modern cars are much safer in crashes for their occupants. And I can attest to that with how we've seen so many walkaways from some pretty serious crashes. in our little fire district. But the heavier car always wins when there are two vehicles, and EVs are heavier. Thus, the NTSB is concerned over greater traffic fatalities, including not just car to car, but car to vehicle, car to pedestrian, or car to scooter, or car to bicycle. In architecture, a good design solution starts with a good problem statement. The same principle applies to solving any complex design problem, and converting transportation systems from liquid fuels to electricity is most definitely complex. We need to have a really good problem statement that looks at all the aspects, not just the range of the battery, and not just the how many charging stations there are, but all of the things that come along with this kind of a transformational change. Now, maybe we need to take another look at hydrogen fuel cells, an abundant element in the universe. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles combine hydrogen fuel with oxygen, which produces electricity to turn the wheel. So technically it is also an electric vehicle. The byproduct is H2O, water vapor. There's no lithium mining in third world countries, no battery cells leaving behind incendiary waste, and a 5-minute refueling time at stations that could be at existing retail station locations. Now, that sounds like another column for another day. This one was a fascinating subject to research. I appreciate the neighbors down in Fairfield who brought it to my attention. I hadn't really thought about the cleanup. DOE is very concerned. They are starting to have those conversations. And it's going to be an interesting battle within the Inslee administration if they're going to listen to their Department of Ecology on the hazards and the lack of readiness, or if they're going to push for electrifying the state motor pool. You can there's lots of links to the resources, the things that I read at the end of the Substack post, and you can subscribe to the Substack either with or without a pledge for notification of new content. Share this with your friends, and thanks for listening.